All right, we are live. I honestly could be more excited. I mean, I've been on this podcast for I think over a year now. I've been interviewing women, soulpreneurs, and this is the first time I have a roundtable of amazing women, soulpreneurs. And the theme I'm also excited about because we are all child-free women. And this is a theme I haven't explored yet, that I haven't shared about myself yet much on social media, but I'm a child-free woman by choice. I'm 44 now, and it's really a choice that I took, and I'm going to share more about it later on. But I'm so curious to hear about all these different women who joined me here today from all around the world. Like, we have such diverse backgrounds, upbringings, and different soulful businesses and projects that I just can't wait to dive into. But let me just first introduce every single woman who's present here. We have Alnaaze. She is a small publisher. She's also an awesome writer and a humanitarian living in Switzerland, but originally from Canada. Hi, Alnaaze. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And we have Els also here, and she is a astrologist and also spiritual mentor, right?
Yeah, I do some spiritual mentorship.
Oh, nice. That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here. And we have Holly here, also an amazing writer. She's writing a book about child-free women that I can't wait to hear more about, this whole project. She has a tarot deck or even two. Holly, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And we have Dena, who's been on my podcast before. She has an incredible story to share on that podcast, and parts of it will be shared also in this podcast about losing her husband very early on. And she's a transformational coach and an artist. And thank you so much, Dena, for being here.
Thank you for having me again.
You're welcome. And we have Anita from Germany, based in Switzerland. She's an amazing psychic healer like myself and a space clearing expert also like myself. So we have many similarities, and also she's German. So again, another similarity. Well, my name is Lais, for those who don't know me. I'm a psychic healer. I'm a space clearing expert. I'm also a writer. And so let's just dive into each one of our stories of how it came to be that we are child-free, whether it's by choice or by circumstances. Each one of us has different stories to share here. And of course, I want the audience, any of the listeners listening in, to know a few things. One is, come with an open mind, because there will be topics discussed here that not everyone, might have a different opinion on. So I would like to start with Alnaaze. Why don't you go ahead and share whatever it is you feel comfortable with of your story, how it came about that you're child-free?
Sure. I mean, it's an interesting thing when you talk about it, right? And I think before we start, to say using the words child-free versus childless is also a very interesting choice of words and an important.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think in my case, it was really interesting being child-free because I made choices without them being conscious choices about the life that I was going to lead, so that I wouldn't have room to have children yet. When it was in my aid work, you're going from country to country, place to place. Some people, they found their partners and they settled in and they had families. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to keep moving. And, so I'd move on from different humanitarian emergency to emergency. And even when I did find a full-time job in Geneva, is why I moved to Switzerland in the first place. It was the kind of job that I wasn't comfortable settling down in anyway, because I was constantly on the move, and that's the life I wanted to lead. And so I was making these choices about the life I was leading, the men I was dating, the things I was doing, but not conscious about it. I wasn't saying, okay, I'm going to make these choices, because I don't want to have kids. When people would ask me, do you want to have kids? I'd be like, well, maybe one day. It's just not time yet. I don't know. It's later. And then, when the time came where I finally felt like, okay, maybe I want to settle down and I want to meet someone. And, maybe I finally did, which was great. Lucky me. He's awesome. But the question of children came up again. And it's interesting that together we went through the whole IVF process, because I was a little bit older.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, for women's health, once you turn 30, you're basically considered geriatric at this point, which is lovely. So my uterus was far from, beyond geriatric at that point. It was the old man from Up waiting for his balloons, basically. But I tried it and it didn't work. And when I finally understood what I was doing, when I had the overwhelming sense of relief when it didn't work.
Wow.
It was just like, okay, you know what? This has never been for me. Why am I so relieved? Because, this is not what I wanted. I was doing this to fit other people's expectations and not my own.
Wow.
I'm not going to try this again. It's time to accept this and move on. And it was just absolutely liberating. And even the way I communicated this choice to other people completely changed after that moment. It wasn't oh, maybe later, whatever. It was, no, this is not for me. My friends have kids. I love their kids. I am the auntie who teaches them how to get into trouble and how to swear. And we talk about all sorts of fun
Right.
things, and it's great. And I like being that auntie. And that's who I am. And I think that's great, in terms of parenting. And so that has also, sort of opened my eyes and my mind, let's say, to discussing this idea with different women about that. And it's how I, along with some other friends, launched the Keeping It Under Wraps anthology book series, talking about, each book has a different topic. And one of the topics was, in fact, parenthood. And the whole point of that book was to, have people come in, submit their essays about parenthood, but to avoid this whole toxic positivity, mommy blogging, oh, my life is wonderful and fulfilled because I have, seven children and I'm still skinny and look at me and whatever. And it's all annoying, right? Like it's just nonsense. So we need to avoid all that crap. And so we wanted just stories of people who wanted children but couldn't have them. People who were like, I have 7 pets. I don't need them. People who were like, my parents are annoying. Why would I want to reproduce? The world is dying. Why would I want to do this? All sorts of reasons. Or I don't want to depend on a man and I know it'll be me. If I have to take care of the children, I will not be able to live a life of my own. You have that too, right? Because so much of the child rearing falls on women even today. So, and then that's how we got into Keeping It Under Wraps, the
I
parents.
just want to say as well, I read the books, all of them. I'm going to link them up in the show notes. So anybody who's interested in any of those amazing books, they will be up in the show notes.
Thank you. Yeah. And it was great to hear people's stories because it was a way of, we had, numerous, goals with those books. And one of them was about just getting these raw voices out there. You don't need to be a professional author. You don't need to be somebody who's been published, 17 times to write your story, because everybody has an excellent story.
Yeah.
Right. So let's help you get those words out. That whole journey for me, that realization that, okay, this wasn't for me, helped me work towards that. And it's something I'm actually, outside of all the other things, I'm actually quite pleased with, because I am convinced that this is the person I am supposed to be now. And it's just sad that you have to go through those things and question yourself and not understand your instincts because the pressure is so much from all sides, right? And it's just when you finally settle in, even now, like, people mean well, but they're like, oh, but Janet Jackson had a kid at 50, maybe you could. No, hell no. My back hurts when I get out of bed sometimes. I'm having kids. Like, no. I threw out my neck looking for my phone charger the other day. This is not happening. So, and that's okay, and other people will want to, and that's okay too. Our journeys are different. And I think if there's anything I'm excited about this podcast, and I'm happy to be discussing with this group of women, is that it's important for each of us to know that our choices are okay, whatever they are. And the whole point of this and of feminism in the end is that our choices are our choices.
Love that.
So if you choose to have a child and stay home, that's great. If you choose to have a child and work, that's great. If you choose not to have a child, that's great too. Like, it's all okay, because it's just about our choices in our lives.
Would you be able to share about the amazing chapter you wrote in that book?
Sure. Yeah, I can read a part of it if you want.
I would love that.
Yeah. And I think writing this chapter, whenever you write any kind of personal essay, you always wonder about how it'll impact the people in your life, right? Like, will they get upset when they read it? Will it hurt them when you read it? So when you're talking about them, this personal, so you try to speak to people, but then at the same time, nobody sees the world the way you do. Everybody's going to take it a different way anyway. So you just kind of do the best you can. And so when I started writing this essay, I was actually quite careful because I was like, I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. And then at some point I was like, you know what? Somebody's going to get upset. Somebody's not going to understand. Somebody's going to think it's stupid. Let me just write it as I feel. And let's see how it goes. And so the essay is called Choices and Chaos. And it goes back to the fact that I made a series of decisions in my life to not have, to have a life that didn't allow me to settle down or have children. And I aimed for chaos, because by choosing chaos, it was the only way I could control what was happening to me, let's say. And so at one point, in the essay, I wrote about what I spoke about before, the IVF journey. I won't read for too long. There was no deep-seated yearning in my heart, and I wasn't feeling a lack of anything in my life per se, except perhaps a house with a pool, a room for my books, and a garage filled with sufficiently fashionable footwear. And I walked that tightrope of chaos versus stability. In fact, it took me actually trying to have children, not because I wanted them, but because I thought I should have them, that made me realize I didn't want them at all, ever. The thought of having to deal with all that responsibility again, and this time as an adult, made me feel like I was suffocating. It had suffocated me in the past to the point where I had ran off to the proverbial ends of the earth, courting the chaos that would help me avoid it all, while bearing the weight of all that had come before. Ah, chaos, you have been such an elegant companion for so long. So it was really just, it's just about, it's an essay about the things that, what we all go through in our lives. And in my case, complicated parenting relationships, having to deal with that, and how that led me along my path. And writing it was so therapeutic. It really sort of cleared my mind, and I did versions and versions of it. And I normally write fiction, and I love writing fiction. And I write random crazy stuff, about mad pigeons and I don't know what, all sorts of crazy stuff. But this was different, because this is something that you're writing about yourself and your heart, and you're putting it out there on the page.
Yes.
People know it's you.
I
Right?
agree as a writer that it's therapeutic to write, but also for me as a reader, as I was reading the book you put out, it was therapeutic for me to just read, as you said yourself, like not the common stories you find on the blogs and social media where everyone is just happy, but like people struggling with parenthood or.
I mean, one of the essays that I really liked in there was this woman had written about how she finally understood that she would have to put her dreams on hold for a while. And that was okay, but she had to understand that. And sometimes she was angry about that. And that was okay too, because there's this whole, speech about how you can have it all. But the only way you can have it all is if somebody else is helping you pick up the slack, right? And otherwise, if you're still doing everything, then, what? So whether it's staff, you have nannies, you have a supportive partner or something, the only way to have it all is if somebody else is helping you do that, and
True.
And that's a choice within the couple, that's a choice within the family, whatever. And then in that essay, what I really liked was that, okay, I had to put something aside because I chose to be this kind of a parent. And so this part of me has to go away for now. And that's something else, right? That came out of this book. It's just, truth, hard truths, nasty truths. And I think those are just super important.
So I want the listeners to go and check out the 3 books that you published, all of different themes. And they are amazing books, like all of them. So thank you so much for being a raw voice, an authentic voice in this world, Alnaaze. And thank you also for sharing your story. I will move on for now to Els. I can't wait to hear your story and how you're feeling as a child-free woman right now.
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, I feel like my journey started when I was pretty young. I'll say that when I was a child, I assumed that I would be a single mother with one daughter because that's how I grew up. So I figured that's how it's done. That's what you do. And when I was about 15 was when I started to really start to become aware that I didn't want to have a child at all. And at that point in time, it was very much connected to the environment. At that point, it's the very early 2000s, and I feel like the consciousness and what was going on in the news and what I was being exposed to was a lot of just feeling an extreme state of alarm. And there's so many billions of people in the world, and why would I bring another human onto this planet? So I felt very strongly about that. I went down a bunch of different internet rabbit holes. I remember at one point I came across this group called Vehement, which was the voluntary human extinction movement, which is basically
What? I've
a
never heard
group
of
of
that.
people who made vows that they wouldn't procreate,
All right.
basically to try to save the earth.
Right.
So, I felt drawn to things like that. I never got too involved in anything, but
Uh-huh.
it was always just sort of there in my head that I'm not the only person thinking about this, and years go by. I just felt pretty like staunchly like I'm not going to have kids. And it wasn't because I didn't have any interest. And I think even now, like I still have a little bit of curiosity. Like, if I had a kid, what would they be like? What kind of relationship could I have with this person or with these people? I still think it's incredibly wild and magical that my body is even, at least in theory, capable of
Right.
creating another human. But yeah, I felt very like resolute about my decision until I hit 30. I feel like at 30, my body started talking, and there's this inner voice going, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" There's like this feeling of like biological clock is ticking, like, you're gonna die. Are you gonna you're gonna leave someone here? And I've always been somebody who's so, I mean, from the time I was a little kid, very much into genealogy, tracing my family trees, wanting to know the names of all, especially my foremothers in every direction.
Wow.
And, writing their names down, imagining what their lives were like, thinking how wild it is that I am the product, and we all are, right? Products of this unbroken chains back into eternity is like mind-boggling. And then again, that little voice being like, are you going to be the one to break this chain? Like feeling almost like I owe it to my foremothers to continue the line. And I had a really beautiful experience at one point where I sat in meditation and I sort of felt for them and was holding this in my heart. And I got this really distinct impression and feeling that they are really excited for me. They're like, we
Oh,
worked so hard for all these generations. We sacrificed and we sacrificed. And you get to be on this earth and just move freely and do as you wish and do it.
yeah.
Yay. Like, don't have kids for us. Like, do it if
I
you want.
relate
But
to that actually.
so that felt really affirming and
Mhm.
it still feels exciting. I'm 36 now. And I feel again like maybe I've kind of gotten over a little, I don't know if it's hormones or what, a little sort of hormonal hump of no, I like my life the way that it is. I love my life. I love my routines. I love my space. I do love children. I love being around kids. I have a bunch of nibblings, nieces and nephews. I have a lot of close friends with little kids. I have great relationships with them. And I like it when we hang out together and we have so much fun and I get to be the fun auntie. And then they go home and I go home and,
Yeah.
it's good. Like it feels good. Yeah, let's see. I feel like this path is calling to me now, like on a deeper level, that there's spiritual growth that my soul desires that is, I'm not going to say it's impossible with kids, but I just know in my heart of hearts that I'm going to go much farther and much deeper with it, taking care of myself. And I've thought about that a lot too, just how many people, especially people who devote themselves to spiritual paths, who don't have children, monks, clergy, all kinds of people. So I found that fascinating as well.
It is.
Um, I feel drawn to like the archetype of mother, like in my astrological birth chart, archetype of mother is prominent there. And that is something that threw me for a little while, where I started to doubt myself or question, like, I see this here. What could this possibly mean if I don't have children? And then I realized that, mother is an archetype with a grand spectrum of possibilities
Mhm.
and expressions. And so, yeah, I feel drawn to mothering in other ways, cultivating community, especially cultivating spiritual community,
Beautiful.
and sharing with people and supporting people in that way.
You brought up a lot of important themes here, the one of the ancestors and connecting to them and really feeling into them and their excitement, which is something I felt too in my path. And then the whole spiritual notion that spiritual growth isn't always just the traditional way of settling down, having kids and having that spiritual growth, but walking a different path and choosing different things. And also the concept of the mother archetype, right? We can be mothers in so many different ways, as you mentioned yourself. So thank you so much for sharing that. I also will link up, of course, your astrology Instagram, because you have a lot of astrological insights to help people with. So thank you so much for sharing your story. It was beautifully shared as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Let's talk to Holly.
Hi.
Hi there. Would you be able to share whatever you feel ready to share with us today about your path and how you became a child-free woman?
Yeah, it's a good thing that I was muted with Else and Alnaaze because I was like, I don't know if everyone saw my head nods, but I was like, I was making vocalizations. So from my heart, like so much of what you both said, I was like, tick, 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 tick. So this is a topic I feel really passionate about and don't often speak openly because there's not space necessarily in society to create this discussion. That's one of the things I'm trying really hard to do. And so I'll talk a little bit about how I got where I'm at. My ancestry comes from, well, my paternal lineage is from California. I'm in Canada. My mother comes from Utah. Her ancestors were actually the pioneers that followed Joseph Smith and settled Salt Lake. So I have behind me on my maternal lineage 7 generations of polygamy. We're actually descendants of William Bradford, who came on the Mayflower, long history of Puritans. So the Mormon Church is kind of similar to Jehovah's Witness, Mennonite. I would say it's quite right wing. I'm not a Mormon, but I was raised in a strict religious Mormon household. And so part of the ancestry of the church, part of the history is that it was founded on polygamy. And Joseph Smith was the founder. I actually have his birth as a child. People were like, ooh, you have Joseph Smith's birthday, And so I didn't know any of my polygamous ancestries. They're too high up. I think it's 3rd or 4th generations above me, but there's 7 generations of men who had many women. And so my entire childhood was not if you have kids, it was when you have kids. And the culture was not only when do you have kids, it's that this is your purpose. There's no discussion around it. You don't go be an independent entrepreneur. You don't do those things. You will be making bread and you will be having babies. And so I mentioned that because I think it did a lot of, well, the first word I wanted to use was damage, and then I caught myself. But I think actually it did do some damage because this topic was so confusing for me. And there was so much internal conflict. And I'm not child-free by choice. I am childless by circumstance. However, as I say that now, 45 years old, I've never been more grateful that what I thought I wanted, what I thought I should want, what I thought was in the cards did not happen. Because my life, I've birthed so many other things. And I purely think I've birthed them because I haven't actually birthed humans. So my 20s were okay. I knew I had time. Around 30, particularly 32, tick, 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 tick. it started to get very confusing. Half of the month I didn't want them. The other half of the month I did want them. I would want them so bad I was crying. I had their names picked out. I had baby books. I have like little cute tie-dye jumpers, and would like write out their names. And the reason it didn't happen, there's many reasons. Probably the primary reason, number one, is that I never found the father. So when I was still fertile, I couldn't find somebody who wanted to go halfers with me. I have a ton of childhood trauma that I had to work through. I have multiple generational lineages of mental illness. That terrified me. My primary career before writing and creating is actually a psychotherapist. And so I've spent countless hours with parents who have said to me confidentially behind closed doors, don't do it. If you ever get the chance, don't do it. I regret having them. I love them. I regret this. That coming from Mormonville, Utah, this is have 6, have 8. This is your purpose. There's nothing better than having kids. Like speaking openly and honestly with people that said no, it left a really profound mark on me. So I think in my 30s, there was so much fear. I was afraid of having them. I was afraid of not having them. I was afraid of making the wrong choice. I was afraid of rocking the boat. I was just afraid, and I was confused, and I was also grief-stricken because at that time I came from little tidy whitey small town Canada, in the mountains, not a lot of culture, not a lot of diversity, but also no representations of women like me. So one of the complicating things that I think made things harder that I do kind of want to mention is, people talk a lot about like toxic masculinity, but there's also toxic femininity. And I think when divine feminine is not in balance, she can actually be very cruel and be very mean. And so one of my wounds that I've actually had to work through is mom. There's been somebody that's been cold or insensitive or cruel to me on this topic. It generally has been a mom. And people, we often don't think, one of the first things we lead with is, hello, how are you? What do you do for a living? Do you have kids? And when I was grieving the children I thought I was going to have that I never ended up having, that was like, being asked that everywhere. And then the stupid things that people would say, not knowing how to discuss the topic with grace, like, oh, but you'd be great. I can't find a dad, like it's not that I think I'd be bad or that I would hit them. It's not happening for me, right? Or, oh, but you could always adopt. Well, what if I don't want to adopt? And what if I don't want to do it alone, So there are pieces of stories that often other people don't know because we're not all fully transparent, right? I have been pregnant twice. That also that complicates things, right? And then for 17 years, I was a childless stepmom. That's a big part of the book that I'm writing on this topic because society's not great about recognizing how women nurture and how women are mothers, whether it's raising other people's kids, plants. In my instance, often my clients, I often felt like I had 500 kids, these little orphan souls that I tucked under my wing that I loved like my own children. Childless grandmother, that was very confusing. I was a childless step grandmother for 5 years. There's no space in society to talk about that. That marriage ultimately didn't work for some reasons that are probably a little bit more obvious right now because it's painful, and so when we don't give women space to discuss things openly, when we don't give women a voice, and when we don't have representational figures of all the different ways this can show up in life and all the different people that we can be, people suffer alone. And I really don't think we have to. There were no books when I was going through this journey that had the words that I needed. They were The Loud, Proud, Childfree by Choice. That wasn't me. because I always just assumed I would have them because that's what I was told it meant to be a woman, right? And then there was the IVF, I can't have them. I'm grieving this. But that also wasn't me, right? I couldn't get past my fear. I couldn't get off the fence. I couldn't find the father. I didn't know, I didn't know how to do all these different things. And so I think the current stat is 1 in 5 do not have children. So 20% of us. From that 20%, 10% didn't want them, 10% couldn't have them. So the other 80% are people like me, these circumstantial childlessness. The message I want to give out is that, for the women that find themselves in this category, that they don't have children in their lives, that they birth themselves, and there are circumstances as to why they're not here. I want to show how it can be a really happy ending. And so I literally feel like I'm a person that births things, but I don't birth humans.
Wow, beautiful.
I birth businesses, I birth podcasts, I birth tarot cards, I create things, like there can be a very fertile nature to people who are not birthing humans. And I think that story really needs to be told. The last thing I will mention, other than the fact that I literally have a house surrounded with animals, which helps me with my nurturing soul, as well as, a big caseload of people that I love and all my different projects. At 42, I had a miscarriage, which was something that I wasn't really open about because I wasn't ready to talk about it. I just didn't want to, it was this quiet little thing. It was my second pregnancy. I didn't feel the need to broadcast it. I wasn't intentionally hiding it, but I mention it because I'm now 45 years old. And so having that window close for me, my gosh, there's been so much relief in knowing I don't have to make the choice. I don't have to think about it anymore. It's like, that's it. It's done. I'm too old. I don't have to go back and forth. That has provided so much psychological support that I can embrace. Okay, well, what else is going to happen for me now? And so when I miscarried at 42, A, I was stunned. I was pregnant. B, then I was stunned that I miscarried. Like, it was so quick, I said it to my family over dinner, like, would you pass the salt? I was like, oh, hey, I had a miscarriage. And everyone was kind of like, what? Because this had been such a huge topic for me.
I think Alnaaze wants to add to that.
Yeah, sorry, I just to quickly jump in, the part where you said that, when the window closed, it was suddenly freeing. I don't know how many of you have watched Fleabag, the UK.
Yes, that's a comedy.
So it's this this woman who is chaos and personified, and she all these different things happen, and I'm not going to get too much into it, but there's this one scene where she's at a bar, and I think she's talking to her boss. I think it's her boss, who's an older, extremely powerful woman, and the woman they're talking about menopause. And she has this whole speech, but then at some point she says, yes, menopause is terrible, it's this and that, and then suddenly you're free. And you're free not to be a person who gives birth, a mother, whatever. You're free to be a businesswoman. You're free to be successful. You're free to be yourself without having to tie yourself to all these other things. It was this really interesting speech, and it just stayed in my mind because we talk about exactly how you were saying that it should be so depressing, when this door closes, and then there's this talk about disappearance of women as well after a certain age. But actually, it can also be very freeing. And it just, all of a sudden, okay, I don't have to worry about this nonsense anymore. Now I can just move on and do other things.
In my case, Alnaaze, that was like very true. And as soon as I embraced that, I feel like my head went like all these projects started like literally pouring out of my head, and I was like, I could do this, and I'm going to 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 write this book, and I'm going to do these tarot cards, because by that window closing, I was able to recognize how much I could create. And the book, the tentative book title that I'm working on is Barren. but I actually want the cover potentially to be a uterus that's like overflowing with like vines and flowers, and maybe like the fertile nature of like women that birth things other than humans, or the circumstances of childless by circumstantial people, because that was very much my story. And had somebody told me that at 35, hey, if you don't do it, it could look like this and you might really love it. I needed that. And I think there are a lot of women needing that right now also.
I think Alice wants to chime in and add to that theme.
Yeah. I mean, I need that. I'm really happy to be here with all of you because I honestly have been feeling kind of isolated in this as well. And yeah, I just wanted to say that there's a part of me that's jealous that the window has closed, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I think a big part of that too is I'm looking forward to like outside voices, the nagging of like, well, aren't you gonna have a kid? You better do it soon. Like there's always these voices around me, and I'm ready for that to just go away and I can just focus on my work.
I have had clients in the past, else, that were complicated, confused, abused as a child, didn't have the support, couldn't find the father, had their own mental illness, had their own sort of health concerns that they were worried about passing on, to facilitate that process where they could say, that's it, it's done. They actually went and got their tubes tied after some contemplation so that they could trigger that early and say, okay, that's enough, and if there's time, I just want to add one other little thing that was really helpful for me. So I think, Elsie, you had talked about like tying off the knots on the family quilt, like all the people before me. Am I really ready to, stop this? Do I not want to reproduce my genes? And as much as I've been told that, I'm selfish for not having them, I actually think most people actually have them for selfish reasons rather than altruistic reasons, right? They want to see their genes versus adopt, or they're bored or they don't know what to do, or society says in your 30s, why don't you like start a family? I'll just do what everybody else is doing, and then they end up hating their role. And so
Who will
part
take
of
care
me,
of you when you're old? Because children are supposed to be some kind of insurance policy, which drives me bananas.
yeah, I know, right?
It's just like, come on.
My answer to that is always there are tons of people in retirement homes with children that don't come to see them, because that's very true, right? But once I read a really beautiful thing that touched me very deeply, and it said, for those that are spiritually inclined or on any level believe in, reincarnation or the evolution of the soul, you get to not come back by not having kids, because your energy isn't anchored here through your creations. Like you don't come back as a spirit guide and like check on your lineage, that you're free to like go do other things. And when I read that, I was like, oh man, that sounds nice, like not having to come back here because I didn't have kids. That sounds great. Please sign me up. Like if I don't have to come back here, that would be super good. I will move on and do other things with my consciousness. So yeah.
I love that last part as well. Holly, thank you so much. You brought up so many important themes that, most of us here probably can relate. Let's move on with
Hello.
Hi, love.
I'm sitting here quietly and I feel like I forgot how to speak or what I want to share because everyone has been incredible. And I went into the audience mode and I feel like I'm watching on my laptop an episode, like a podcast episode. And then now is my turn to be part of it.
Yeah, you are. And you already shared part of it on my other podcast episode where I interviewed you alone, but your story is just so poignant. I'm so grateful that you're coming on again to share that poignant story.
Yeah.
So why don't you go ahead and share how you feel about being childless at this stage?
Yeah, there's a lot here to share. Actually, I was writing keywords to remember, there's so many different elements. It wasn't one thing, but the first thing I'll share is I'm 35. So it's this age where I related so much to else, as it feels like the age of you don't know what happens in life. Like sometimes I'm not in the 40s category where it's done and sealed. I loved what Holly said about that, where the decision was made for her. And so I feel like First of all, it's by circumstance that I don't have children, and also by choice. And by circumstance, how it started is I lost my husband in 2015. He passed away suddenly in a traumatic, and that trauma hit me hard. And I also lost a partner after a 13-year relationship since middle school. And so that huge loss carried with it, of course, 13 years. My identity was shaped up by this person since I was 14. That's when we developed a huge part of our identity and ego and so on, and belief systems. And so I had basically, after that gigantic grief and healing journey to go on, PTSD, trauma, and so on. And that on its own felt like a huge reason of I just can't have kids. Like the decision in that at that point was, right now I can't think of kids. I may have missed the boat. I'm not sure if I will in the future, but I definitely know it's not a priority where I was back then. And that first thing is part of my values is I don't believe in bringing kids to the world if we are dealing with extreme like PTSD, complex trauma, have a lot of healing happening. If my financial life collapsed, everything. I lost overnight my house, my business, my husband. And so I found myself just with a suitcase moving from Palestine to the United States, and suddenly in a foreign country, and without any friends, just my mother and siblings were here, and they gave me home, and I started a new life. And so it felt unstable. And I believe during instability, it's selfish to bring a kid to the world, unless, and this is an opinion, absolute opinion, I don't call other people selfish. For me, it felt selfish because some people, their life changes like a month later after they have a kid, doorways open up, opportunities. Like I believe everything could change in a minute. So it's not like black and white, but it felt unstable financially, unstable mentally. Why would I think of kids or to rush into a next relationship and just hop on the train of checking the list of what I should be as a woman, especially as an Arab woman, especially as a Palestinian woman. That checklist is the priority for us, and it's what makes you a woman, basically. Or else you're like always looked at, there's something wrong with you. There's a defect here, like what happened to her? Why did she not have children? And so that was the first choice of the circumstance influenced my decision of I'm not stable to bring a child to the world, even if I wanted to. At the same time, mixed with that was my partner, who shaped up a huge part of my personality, didn't want kids, and always would put it in my head like it's stressful, your freedom ends. And it got ingrained in me. And until now, I don't know if I like took that on and I never cleaned it up, or if it's mine. With all honesty, and with all the things I had to work through over the years, I never felt like processing that. As my life, when it shifted, as he passed away, I appreciated my freedom more than ever. Something about even being single, since I was never single since I was 14 years old. Something about being single made me realize I love to run wild and free. I'm a free soul. I don't like to be restricted. I don't like my routine to be tied to anyone else, even my family. And I don't like responsibilities. And that was a huge, a huge thing to work through in life generally, like responsibilities burden me. And so I realized freedom is a key value of mine. And I always associate having kids with my freedom will end. And that came from so many places, including my mother. My parents got divorced when I was 18. And that was a really tough experience on me emotionally, because home was so important for me. And when that was broken, I saw how my mom struggled, having kids and so on, and how she put her dreams on the side and had to work hard. She had no choice. And the moment I feel like there's no choice, like you lose a lot of choice. Your time is not yours. You can't just quit your job and think of, I want to be an entrepreneur and let me explore. And if it doesn't work out, I'll just do something else. So a lot of this exploration wouldn't be available, I felt, if I had children. And the feeling of responsibility comes from, like, culturally growing up, you're always given chores to do, cleaning on the weekend, all the things. Like, I grew up in a lot of responsibility in the household. My sister is 10 years younger than me. And so I was helping alongside with my mother, changing her diapers when I was just 11 years old. I went into adulthood like immediately. And I felt like I did miss on this element of just being a child and in my childlike nature. So I had to be the eldest kid who's responsible. I always put my emotions on the side, my stuff on the side, and the priority is always taking care of the youngest. And I was like the assistant of my mother. And I felt once I was an adult, I was burnt out. I did a lot of things already.
You did.
Yeah. And because I live in the US, I feel I have a lot of freedom to not think about what people say culturally. If I was in Palestine and I love my people and my culture, and if you follow my social media, I fight for my people so hard, but we still have cultural elements where for us, bringing children to the world is a form of resilience. And with ethnic cleansing for Palestinians, we have high fertility rates. People like give birth to a lot of children. You kill one of us, okay, we'll birth 3 more. And so, like, this is the pattern in the culture of we always give birth to children and we keep growing and we keep our culture, ethnicity, everything going on the land. And so it is really important in my culture to have children. The other thing is the world chaos. Definitely one of the reasons, like Alnaaze mentioned, many people have all these reasons of the world chaos, war, what we're seeing right now happening, like, makes me feel, why do I want to bring someone into this world of chaos when I'm barely navigating it? It is extremely collectively stressful emotionally. Yes, there's a lot of beauty in the world. I see it. I love to create. I love to make art. I birth designs and art into the world. I make t-shirts. I coach. I do healing. I do a lot of things. So I'm always creating. And that is my form of creation, birthing things into the world. And as a spiritual woman, I really see a pattern out there of a lot of spiritual women. We value our freedom and birthing things into the world. We also like see a lot beyond the illusions in the world, and that makes us question sometimes, many of us, if we want to bring a child to this kind of world and into these systems that are oppressive and all of that. So I feel like fate played a part in it. I didn't meet somebody until now to settle with and do life with and love, to think and consider if I want to bring a child to the world. So I'm in the in-between phases of, I love my freedom. I don't feel like I want kids. However, I'm 35 and I'm like, there's a little window of miracles of falling in love with somebody and something suddenly shifting in me, because I do change a lot. I have this flexibility in my personality. So I'll leave it to fate, but I'm happy on my own. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That was powerful, Dana. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And
yeah, thank you.
I can't even imagine the pain you and your people must be going through and have been going through. Thank you for all of that. I'm gonna link up Dana in the show notes as well with her social media accounts if you want to follow her. And that brings us to our lovely Anita. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm so honored. I feel so honored to be here among these wonderful women with sharing, listening to your stories that are really so poignant. And there's so much truth and there's so much truth in all of that for myself in a way. And yeah, I would say I'm certainly child-free by circumstance, by late choice, and by soul choice, which came in at a very late stage. And so, yeah, I grew up with the expectations around me. You're going to have children like everyone else. And I felt so different in many ways because I thought I have so much to do around myself already. I came in with a karma I had to dissolve over many decades. I'm the one who came in to do all the ancestral healing, and which was I took up on me. So in a way, there were so many duties in between, and I didn't feel ready to have children, but yet I had the wish when I was 12, 13. I thought, oh, I want to have a family, not a family. I want to have 4 children, but no guy. There was no guy around. I didn't see a guy in that.
That's nice.
There was no guy. And I thought, okay, 4 children, that's a lovely choice. And I chose, I don't know who said it, who mentioned it before. I chose names and everything.
Yes.
And then life carried me on and carried me away, and with so many lovely experiences and just living, traveling a lot, and growing and taking care of myself, of my family story, of stories behind, and trying to become the next best version in a certain way. And I hadn't met the guy, so at that point it wasn't possible. And when I met the guy already had 2 children and said, no, I can't. I already 2 children is enough for me. And I'm unable to take care of more children. And in a way, disappointment, because I thought I take it like it's a negative say against me, against our relationship. But in a way, it was good because it gave me the space to do so many things, to evolve, to go into the healing process, to become a healer, to learn a lot of things. And I didn't have the time. Quite frankly, I didn't have the time to have children. And then one day, I woke up and I had a miscarriage. But at that point, I didn't really notice because it happened so quickly. I had to go on with my daily life. And only later I noticed it. We noticed this with my obstetrician. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. But there was an egg coming into trying to nest and it couldn't stay. So what's the story behind? People came up and said, what about you? When are you getting married? I never wanted to get married. So when are you getting married? When are you going to have the children? When are we going to have the grandchildren? And my father, who said the day you're going to have children, like it was a logical thing for him. And I never came up with the children in the family. And I felt so out of place because I felt so judged because I judged myself. Yeah. And I felt judged through the eyes of society because society said, well, you need to have children. And I felt I didn't feel whole around that. I didn't feel worthy. And so I put all my energies in healing processes and becoming a healer, becoming a coach. Work was always a very important part in my life. And also the freedom to go on a trip when I want to go on a trip, to find the fulfillment in all the activities and not being responsible for children. And then I had the biological clock coming in, and this biological clock put up a lot of pressure emotionally on me. And I came to a point, it was painful for me to see women being pregnant or being around small children. Really was so painful. I remember a day I had to go somewhere to lock myself up into a bathroom because I just couldn't stand it. And it was, so you just keep smiling, you keep going on, you keep trying to find your way in all of that. But there was this voice in me saying, children is not, it's not going to be for you in this lifetime.
Wow.
There's a kind of choice behind. And then I met that one of my mentors, and I think she thought I knew. And she said, we talked about having children, and she said, well, it's clear you're not going to be a mother in this lifetime. And suddenly all the awareness dropped. It felt a little bit like a shock, but it was a relief because words had been put on it. I could suddenly adopt this idea of being childless, and the relief, feeling the relief, and being in my life and being the best in my life without children, without having this responsibility around them. And I always had been thinking back, because I had an elderly uncle, and he was the first one. I was like, I heard that since I had been 10 years old, and he said, well, in this world you cannot put children. And he got married in his late 50s to not be able to, so that his wife couldn't procreate anymore in a late marriage, which I found very interesting. And I always felt attracted to the kind of thought. I felt it was cruel to have that kind of thought. The world is too cruel to put children into this. But I accepted his idea, and I admired his idea. I have a lot of friends without children, not being married, and no children. And I have friends who went through family life, lots of them being divorced or in a following up couple and with children. So I always was in between, and I enjoyed being with the women and people, being independent, going on trips, doing things we just felt free to do. And then enjoying the children of my friends. Felt very fulfilling being part of that world at the same time, listening to them, spending time with them, and being like a co-mother in some cases. It felt very nice. And it felt very good just going home and not having those family problems, not those crises, marriage crises around the children. My mother had told me one day, very many years ago, she told me, we never quarreled. We only quarreled around you, the children, because we didn't agree on education or on things to do. So, and I thought that's interesting. So people quarrel around children and get a divorce in many cases. And then one day I went into a meditation, and I suddenly saw my body, and I got what my mentor told me. She said, no, you weren't destined to have children in this lifetime. And I suddenly got the gift to go into my womb. And I was, oh no, I'm not having children in this lifetime, but this is a soulful decision coming in, because I already came in with that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to go on my path of evolution, of becoming a healer, of doing what I wanted to do, basically, and what I came here to do, and many, many other things. And I thought that's interesting. So the decision was being made up there, but I had to go through the evolution to come to the conclusion by myself. The thing I found very difficult was to adjust to society. You're going to have children, you're a woman, you have to mother, you have to take care of children. And I found sometimes we had in society these discussions around childless women, and we had movements of other women not supporting the idea that people were childless. And I thought, you don't know anything about these women, because it's not necessarily by choice they're doing this, it's by circumstances. And some of them are very, very sad and depressed around it. And I've met so many depressed women putting themselves under the stress of birthing, having a child. So going through the process and learning to be in pain, to be a mother childless, is a very, very cruel in a way. And then the interesting thing happened in my work. I suddenly started working with children. I accompanied, and I still do, a lot of children. And then so mothers came, and then grandmothers came, and sometimes from the grandmother, the child came, or the younger women, of families, and then the next generation. So I'm working with 3 generations.
Oh,
And
that's
it's
lovely.
so interesting to see that. And I just love it. I love it to be able to put healing, to help young women. And it's fascinating when these children of 7 or 6 or 5, when they're telling their moms, I need an appointment with Anita.
Oh my God, that's so cute.
Yeah, it's lovely, really. And when you see them growing up, and suddenly one of those children is 18 years old or 20 years old, and it's just wonderful. I find it's wonderful. And what also happened, suddenly I had many young women coming in, losing children, having miscarriages, and they couldn't get pregnant again. They had issues around that, and it's like healing, sending the soul to the light, the soul that stayed in the womb, clearing the karma. Sometimes there's karma behind, which is making it unable that new children can nest in, can come in, can birth. And so I find this really very inspiring, and I'm very grateful for that, because the work in the womb, I'm helping other women to do the work around their womb, and I'm opening their consciousness around their own womb and the rituals around it, what they can do around it. And I find that is so important. So in a way, I have a lot of children in my environment, but I can always send them home, and that feels so good. It's it's not my responsibility. I love them all to bits, but at a certain point, I go back into my life. So the story really is that late realization that my soul came to a decision. And what I found painful was the biological clock. That really was so painful. I had it a few times in my life, and I had it very late afterwards again, and where I thought everything is done, I'm through, even with menopause, but still, even in menopause, it came up. And I was like, what's going on in here? I'm done with that. Don't come up with it again.
I just had a question, actually, because a few people have brought up the biological clock, and I'm just wondering how much of that is actually biology, and how much of it is just we've been bombarded by society that you have to have children by a certain age, and we know that we can only have it by a certain age, because then after that, we're not producing eggs, we can't do it anymore. So how much of it is truly biology versus, and this sort of inner need, and how much of it is just so much messaging coming out from so many different places that this is what you have to do and your time is limited to do it, and therefore time is running out? Like, I don't know. It's a question I'm throwing out there, because I often wonder, how would any of us react if we had a total freedom as to whether or not you could have, the choices you make with regards to, having children. If there was no societal influence, if there was you could or you couldn't, it doesn't matter. You could be who you want to be, whether or not you have them. Your identity is not defined by this. Your role in your culture, in your family, in your society is not defined by this. Would that clock hit us as hard in our 30s? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think Holly as well wants to add to that.
I tracked it. I actually had the same question. I had the same concerns, because in my 20s, when it came up, I was like, I got lots of time. I got lots of time. And so in my 30s, it became a lot more complicated. And part of it was wondering expectations. So my first pregnancy, I was a teen, and I had made a promise to myself that soul could come back. And so I was able at some point to recognize that I was like bargaining with like a teenager, like I had made a decision, oh my God, years and years ago, and couldn't like unbreak that promise. I couldn't make that happen. So in my 30s, I tracked it. And in my instance, it was very much based on ovulation. Like what, tracking my cycle, and it's like, here comes the egg, and my brain and my body was like, want the child, need the child, gonna cry over the child, gonna name the child, gotta have sex. Like, what if this doesn't happen? Like, I went crazy. And then I would release the egg, and a little bit of time had passed, and I'm in my, different phase of my cycle. And it was like, no, like, I'm good. No, I don't want to change your baby's diaper. Like, no, I don't want any kids coming over, so But that didn't happen in my 20s. I do think for some women, because I don't want to speak for all women, obviously, I think nature might know you're running out of eggs. And so I got more frantic progressing through my 30s. And it didn't really feel psychological because it was only a certain part of the month that I became kind of like a crazy person. And then I could let go of it. And then it came back.
Thank you for adding to that. And Anita, also, thank you so much for sharing everything. I'm going to link up Anita's website and her amazing services on the show note. And well, my story, it's like a mix of all of your stories. There's like each one of you who shared something I could identify with. So it's beautiful how we all came together here today. But yeah, for me, it was a bit like beginning as a teenager, like else. I was always aware of, I'm not sure I want to have babies. I was thinking at 15 up until 18, maybe I will adopt one day. But as I grew up and I studied and I went into corporate, and I never had that feeling that I wanted to marry or really to settle down, have kids. But of course, society tells you you have to. And then all your friends start to settle down and your sister starts to settle down, have kids. And then I got all stressed up and thought I needed to get married. At the same time, I had my spiritual awakening at the age of 30, and I traveled to Thailand for 1 year. I was there studying energy healing and meditation, and that opened up my whole consciousness and my psychic awareness. And suddenly I was able to see all of my past lives, and I went into so many of them where I was a bad mother, a good mother, and everything in between, and where I lost children, where they died in accidents or during childbirth, but also where I had beautiful lives with children. And I just felt like I had the whole experience. It's so many lifetimes, and I felt like I was such an old soul. I've been a mother, I've done everything, and I felt like, oh, this lifetime, it's not about that. This time I can create something completely different. I can liberate myself. I don't need to get married. I don't need to have kids. It's a bit like Els was sharing also with the ancestors. When I connected to my ancient ancestors, they were cheering me on and say, you don't have to do what we did. Like, you're free to travel. I'm nomadic. I travel. I live in different countries. And I just love that experience of being in these different cultures and experiencing life so richly and differently. And I also noticed as of my 30s, I never felt inspired by women who told me, oh, I'm going to get married, or hey, I'm just pregnant. I was like, I feel inspired by many different things. Like, they can, of course, have kids, get married. But then if they tell me I started a business, I get so excited. Or if they said I wrote a book, those things excite me. It was never just the fact, oh, I'm settling down or having kids. And then also, like Holly was sharing, since I started my healing business then at the age of 31, and I accompanied so many women who had children, and like Holly was sharing, many of them said, look, it's not like I regret it, but like, don't feel bad if you don't choose to have kids. It's like really not what, people always share about it is. And I had also parents tell me they wouldn't do it again. If they had the choice now, they wouldn't take the same choice again of having kids. And of course, also have friends and clients who love being a mom and all of that. But contrary to many of you, I never had my biological clock act up at all. So I was always at peace. I never had the sense, oh my God, now I need to. Or also, like Holly, I met a partner who already had kids and they were already in their teenage years. So when I came into that, I was experiencing what life is like with children and how stressful it is on the parents many times and what it takes from them. And so I did experience myself as a stepmom, at least. So that was both very enriching, but also very painful in so many different ways. Yeah. And so now I'm 44. I'm almost jealous of women who are menopausal or already went through menopause, because I'm like, oh, that for me, it will just feel like a liberation because I'm done with it. I don't have to worry of ever getting pregnant. But yes, I don't know. I was just, with my spiritual awakening and having seen how many lives I had as a mother, I just felt I have experienced everything I had to experience. And I'm just here to feel free for the first time. in my life, in my soul's evolution. It's the first time where I feel like I can express myself very differently and feel what it's like not to be a mother, not to belong to a man, like through marriage, but because I choose to love somebody and I choose to stay with them without getting married. So yeah, having said all that, like many of you said, I love birthing things. I love birthing books. I'm a writer. I love being creative. All of that. I nurture my community, my clients. So I feel like we can be mothers in so many different ways.
I just wanted to share that I really resonate with what you said about feeling into other lives, which is something that I've also done and was a really big point of realization for me. Oh, I've been a mother
Yeah.
over and over and over, and I think my soul is choosing in this life like something new.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's a whole new like dimension once you dive into past lives and your soul's evolution. And I can also very much relate to Holly when she said, I don't want to come back here. Like I don't want to create karma with other souls that I'm birthing and come back and have to relive that karma. I'm very much also on that notion of, you know, if I can resolve all my karma in this lifetime and then maybe not come back for a while, I would be very happy. Holly, do you have to add something to that?
Yeah, all the emphatic nods gonna get myself over here, but that also was one of the most healing things that could have happened to me, because I felt tortured by the thought of making the wrong choice either way, having them and regretting it, or not having them and regretting it. And then so sitting on the fence paralyzed, weaving in reincarnation into that, because I had that same epiphany one day. I was like rocked by like, I've had the thought that I've had tons of lives, having tons of babies. Why do I feel like I'm missing out on something I potentially been doing for eons? And so, yeah, there's a lot of healing there, you know?
Totally. Yeah, thank you. It's astonishing, all the dimensions that we can think about. Yeah, all of us had all these different experiences, but also so many common themes here between us. I think it just felt like a very beautiful, open and safe space for me at least to participate in this roundtable and to share also my story. And I just want to thank everyone for making it happen, for creating this beautiful space, and for being so open and vulnerable and raw about what you experienced. And yeah, I'm always amazed by women's stories and their paths and everything that they went through to become who they are. So yeah, thank you so much. And Holly, I think you have to share something here.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
A, thank you so much for having me. But B, if you ever want to do a podcast on childless stepmoms, let me know.
Oh, yes.
My brain. I could also talk about that topic for like 3 hours. What it's like, because I think that's a chapter of the story that's often not talked about, the women who have not had kids of their own, but being a stepmom to other kids.
It's huge.
I always notice they do this like nod, like they have something to say. So
yeah, we do. We totally do. Yeah, no. Also, I just want the listeners to really, I keep repeating it, but go to the show notes. All of us will be linked up there with our social media and our websites. We all have beautiful businesses that you can check out. All of us have amazing projects, books, businesses, so go check it all out. Is there anybody who has some final thoughts or something they wish to share before we depart?
Well, just thank you for having us. This has been great.
Oh, thank you, Alnaaze. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here.
It was lovely meeting you all. It was very inspiring.
Yes, it was very inspiring. So that concludes our beautiful podcast episode. Thank you to the listeners as well who are hanging out with us here, and see you in the next episode. Goodbye.
bye.
Bye.